The package arrived on a Tuesday thick with gloom, the kind of day that swallows light whole, and with it came the silence. Not the ordinary silence of an empty house, but the watchful kind, heavy, that settles when something vital to your routine, to your precarious balance, vanishes abruptly. Shadows of the Everyday, my favorite obscure podcast, that familiar thread of a raspy voice accompanying me nightly through my headphones, hadn't updated. Again. 11 days now. 11 days of a void echoing louder than any episode. Edward, the host, was meticulous, almost obsessive, with his release schedule. Something was profoundly wrong. The unease, initially a low hum, became a mental itch impossible to scratch. I began scouring obscure forums, fan groups dedicated to that independent, almost amateur production, exploring accounts of inexplicable encounters, unsettling coincidences, and the persistent feeling of being watched. I found only murmurs, other listeners equally perplexed by Edward's disappearance. No one had news. It was in one of these digital rabbit holes, an encrypted forum demanding passwords and codes straight from a spy novel, that I found a link. Unindexed, invisible to any search. It simply existed, like a footprint unseen in snow. Unpublished backups, so. My heart hammered, a dull drum against my ribs. I downloaded the file. It was massive, containing hours of audio. Not finished episodes, but fragments, raw recordings, rehearsals, discarded ideas. Edward's voice was the same, yet different. Tighter, breathless, like he was speaking while running or hiding. I put on my headphones, sinking into the darkness of my bedroom in Portland, my only refuge in a tiny apartment. The first files were normal, analyses of known cases, wild theories. But then, a fragment titled only Week 14 froze the blood in my veins. Edward described, with intimate, specific detail, an incident that had happened to me just 3 days prior. The inexplicable smell of damp earth and mold that flooded my bathroom on Wednesday night, despite closed windows, a smell that vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only residual nausea. He narrated the same event, word for word, as if he'd been there. A chill traced my spine, a sense of unreality, like the floor giving way. Scrambling frantically through the files, the terror solidified. Week 22. Edward detailed the sensation of an icy hand touching my right shoulder while I washed dishes last Thursday. A sensation I dismissed as a random chill, but now, relived through his precise description, gained a palpable, physical dimension. Week 31. He spoke of the sound of dragging footsteps from the empty hallway of my building in the early hours of Saturday. Footsteps I'd heard distinctly, ceasing when I flicked on the light, revealing only motionless shadows. He knew. Knew things only I could know, experiences I'd kept to myself, brushing them off as fatigue or overactive imagination. Each fragment was a haunting confirmation, an intimate violation. Edward wasn't just narrating scary stories, he was narrating my scary story, in real time, before I could even fully comprehend it. His voice in the recordings grew progressively more frayed. The usual rasp became a throat-tearing scrape. His breathing, once calm, turned ragged, punctuated by long, trembling pauses, as if he were listening for something beyond a door. He began to whisper, not for dramatic effect, but from pure dread. "It senses when you notice," he gasped in one fragment. "The details, the small details are bait. Threads. It's weaving." "Oh, weaving what?" Paranoia, like black fog, began to seep into my daily life. Every peripheral shadow, every unexplained night sound, gained deadly weight. I caught myself compulsively checking locks, avoiding dark windows, feeling a constant presence, silent, heavy as lead, hovering just behind me. The climax came when I found the last file. Untitled, just a date. Yesterday. My fingers trembled as I clicked. The audio was short, maybe 10 seconds max, and it was silence. An absolute, profound silence, the vacuum before the detonation. But not an empty silence. It was a full silence, expectant, like the moment you know you're not alone in a dark room. And then came the whisper. Not any whisper, but a hoarse, drawn-out rasp, as if the throat producing it were full of sand or blood. A whisper that seemed to come not from the headphones, but from the very air around me, from the empty space behind my head, echoing inside my skull with a repulsive intimacy. I'm in your bedroom now. The shock was physical. An icy jolt seized every nerve. My body froze, rigid as a statue, muscles locked in pure panic. Breath stopped. My eyes wide, scanned the familiar bedroom, now transformed into a nightmare set. The faint streetlight bled through the window, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to breathe. The closet, its door slightly ajar, hid abysses. The curtain swayed faintly, though there was no wind. Impossible. Absurd. Edward didn't know me, didn't know where I lived. I used online pseudonyms, VPNs, layers of anonymity. How could he be here? Rational logic, already fragile, crumbled. The whisper echoed, incessant, inside my skull. I'm in your bedroom now. It was a statement, not a threat. A fait accompli. The fear was no longer just fear. It was a living entity, crawling over my skin, filling my lungs, weighing down my bones. Every particle of air seemed to vibrate with an invisible, malignant presence. I dared not breathe loudly, dared not blink. My senses, honed to a painful edge, captured every minuscule shift in the environment. The ticking clock in the living room sounded like hammer blows. The distant hum of the refrigerator was a roar. And was there another sound? An almost inaudible scrape beneath my bed? The faintest groan of a floorboard behind me? Or was it just the blood pounding in my temples, the echo of terror inside my head? I couldn't tell. The whisper had contaminated everything. I'm in your bedroom now. It was here. Edward, or the thing wearing Edward, or what Edward had become. Time lost meaning. It could have been seconds, minutes, hours. I was paralyzed, seated at my desk, facing the computer whose dark screen vaguely reflected my ghostly image and the dancing shadows behind me. Every shadow in the reflection seemed to take on a life of its own, stretch, draw closer. The pressure in the room intensified, as if the air were solidifying, becoming viscous, difficult to draw in. The streetlight seemed to weaken, as if a thick fog were forming outside, sucking away the light. My own bedroom, my sanctuary, had become a torture chamber, a stage for an unimaginable play about to unfold, and I was the captive audience, the sole spectator. I remembered then the earlier fragments, the bait, the threads Edward mentioned. Every supernatural event I'd experienced. The smell of earth, the icy hand, the footsteps in the hall, weren't isolated incidents. They were markers, signs, part of a pattern being woven around me, invisible, while I lived my life blind. The podcast, Shadows of the Everyday itself, wasn't just macabre entertainment. It was a trap, bait for something that fed on attention, on fear, on isolation. Edward had discovered it too late, and his investigation, his attempt to document the inexplicable haunting him, and now haunting me, had led him to me. Or the thing had led him to me. The last gasp of his consciousness, or what remained of it, was that final whisper, an impossible warning, a terrifying confession. Now I knew the entity, the weaver of shadows, was here. It wasn't a question of if it would manifest, but when. The whisper wasn't the end. It was the beginning, the prelude. And I, Henry, sitting in my bedroom in Portland, listening to the deafening silence that followed the whisper, knew the next sound might be the last I'd ever hear. The definitive scrape under the bed. the groan of wood directly behind my chair, the icy breath on the nape of my neck. The paralysis began to crack, not from courage, but from an animal survival instinct piercing the icy crust of terror. My fingers, numb, twitched slightly on the armrests. A muscle in my leg spasmed. Movement was necessary. Turn around. Face whatever was sharing the dark space with me. But the fear, a colossal weight, still anchored me. The whisper echoed, a mantra of horror. "I'm in your bedroom now." And in the silence that followed, more frightening than any scream, I could almost feel the movement, the breathing, the patient expectation of the thing that had woven its shadow around my life, and that now, finally, claimed its prize. The bedroom was no longer mine. It was its. And I was merely a guest, about to be dismissed permanently. The air trapped in my lungs burned. It had to be now, before the shadows solidified, before the whisper became a touch. The first corpse I saw wasn't dead. It stood frozen in the middle of Penn Avenue in Pittsburgh, under a fine rain that didn't clean anything, just made the asphalt darker, more like old blood. It was Mr. Henderson, who ran the corner convenience store. His body was rigid as marble, eyes wide in pure, terrified ecstasy, fingers stretched out like frozen claws in the air. Fear. The Eckhart syndrome had taken him full force, turning a scare, maybe a mugging, into a living statue of agonizing flesh. He still breathed, tiny chest movements barely visible, but he was trapped inside his own skin, a walking coffin. This was before we knew love was worse. They called it Eckhart syndrome, a clinical, cold name for something that felt like pure, evil witchcraft. A virus, they said, though no one knew for sure. We only knew what it did. Intense emotions weren't abstract things confined to the mind anymore. They overflowed. Violently. Rage made the tiny vessels in your eyes burst, bleeding like hot, ruby tears. A fit of fury could blind you, or worse, soak your brain in blood from the inside. Fear, as Mr. Henderson demonstrated so well, locked up your nervous system. Freezing muscles, joints, even breathing became a Herculean effort. Total paralysis, conscious, while your heart beat desperately against a prison of flesh. It was horrible, but it wasn't the worst. The worst was love, or anything that resembled it. An intense wave of affection, desire, deep fondness. And something inside you just started to melt. Not metaphorically, literally. Organs lost shape, fused together into a warm, formless mass. It was a slow, agonizing death, filled with lancinating pain while your insides turned into biological soup. A girl on my street, Emily, just 8 years old, died hugging the dog she'd saved from being hit by a car. The pure, overwhelming love she felt in that moment was her sentence. They found them together, the dog licking her already cold face, while inside her there was no distinct liver, spleen, or kidneys anymore, just a warm, red paste. Survival meant anesthesia. Not physical, but emotional. Becoming a shadow. They called it chemical ataraxy, but it was just a heavy cocktail of antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, mood stabilizers, and something else, something the government labs threw into the mix, a high-impact neural suppressor. We took it religiously, every 12 hours. The pill was big, turquoise blue, and left a taste of metal and ashes in your mouth. The effect was like being wrapped in dirty cotton, inside a dark aquarium. The world lost its color, sounds were muffled, the taste of food vanished. And more importantly, emotions were dampened, contained, kept at a safe, bland level below the lethal threshold. You didn't feel enough rage to bleed, enough fear to freeze, or enough love to melt. It was a non-life, a functional zombie existence. My name is Robert. I live alone in a tiny apartment in East Liberty. I work reviewing digital documents, something that demands zero emotion. My routine is a prison of precision. Alarm, blue pill, tasteless coffee, work, blue pill, flavorless dinner, agitated and empty sleep. I avoid news, sad movies, music that might strike any chord within me. I avoid people, especially Anna. Anna was my neighbor, 2 floors down. Before Eckhart, we exchanged books, coffees, laughs that echoed in the hallway. There was something between us, a sweet tension, a possible future we never got to explore. Now, Anna was a walking hazard to me, and I to her. Every exchanged glance, every shy smile, every time her hand almost brushed mine when taking a book, was a calculated risk. A stupid risk. The cocktail suppressed, but didn't extinguish. Beneath the thick layer of chemical indifference, something stubborn and warm still existed. It was an ember under deep ash, and any breeze could fan it into deadly flames. The problem was the world didn't cooperate. Infrastructure was crumbling. Power outages were common. And on a cold July night, the lights went out. Everything. Absolute darkness swallowed the apartment, the city, the world. Panic was instant, visceral. Not for me, not initially. For Anna. She was afraid of the dark. Truly afraid. A primal, childlike fear that the cocktail kept under control, until the control vanished with the lights. I heard the scream. Not a loud scream, but a choked sob of pure terror, rising from below. My heart, dulled by the cocktail, gave a violent lurch against my ribs. A hammer blow of panic. Anna. Fear. The cadaveric paralysis. Was she locking up right then, going rigid on the sofa, the bed, the floor? Immobilized, conscious, while the darkness, her greatest terror, enveloped her. She would die like that, slowly, suffocated by her own physiology. The emotion that flooded me had no name. It was an explosive mix of dread, urgency, and something deeper, older, that the blue pill had never quite managed to erase completely. The ember under the ash got oxygen. I felt an abnormal warmth begin in my chest, a sharp, lancinating pain, as if something were coming loose, losing shape. Love. Deep concern. The overwhelming desire to protect her. It was starting. The internal fusion. But her scream echoed again, weaker, more desperate. Rage then bloomed, violent and righteous. Rage against the virus, against the blackout, against the absurd, cruel situation. I felt warm pressure behind my eyes, a wetness that wasn't tears. Blood. I was bleeding from my eyes. The two emotions, love and rage, warred inside me, each triggering its physical curse. The heat in my chest intensified, the pain grew sharper, a sensation of melting, of horrible organic disorder. At the same time, blood ran hot down my temples, blurring vision already hampered by darkness. It was double torture, a death sentence on 2 fronts. I didn't think. Survival, or the instinct to reach Anna, spoke louder. I stumbled in the dark, blinded by blood and lack of light, guided only by the sound of her terror. Every step was agony. My chest felt full of lava, my eyes burned. I found the door, stumbled down the stairs like a drunkard, leaning on the cold wall that brought no relief. Her apartment was unlocked, as agreed for emergencies. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Cold sweat, urine, and something else, metallic, sweet. Blood. She was on the living room floor, near a candle that must have blown out when the power died. Her body was rigid, contorted in a grotesque pose of petrified terror. Her eyes, huge and white in the gloom, stared at nothing with terrifying intensity. But she wasn't fully paralyzed. One arm was outstretched, fingers curled towards a blue vial lying on the floor. The vial for the cocktail. She hadn't taken her dose. Maybe because of the blackout, the panic. Maybe it had fallen. Now, fear had her, locking her muscles, preventing her even from swallowing the pill that could save her. Her breathing was a shallow rasp, almost imperceptible. She was suffocating, conscious, inside her own armor of flesh. Seeing her like that was a dagger to what remained of my heart. Love, compassion, the pain of seeing her that way, exploded within me, feeding the heat in my chest. I felt something give way, an organ yielding, a wave of hot nausea rising in my throat. At the same time, rage against the injustice of it all made more blood gush from my eyes, streaming down my face like tears of hot hate. I lunged forward, staggering, every movement torture. I fell to my knees beside her. My fingers, barely obedient, fumbled for the blue vial. It was hard, my body wasn't responding right, my insides felt like they were dissolving, my vision was a red, blurry tunnel. But I managed. One pill in my trembling, blood-smeared hand. I tried to put it in her mouth, but her lips were clamped shut, rigid. Panic seized me. I couldn't let her die like this. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I put the blue pill in my own mouth, chewed it fast, the horrible taste of metal and ashes mixing with blood. I swallowed. It wasn't my time. I'd risk an overdose. I just needed the suppressor to act fast, to contain the madness inside me, to give me a few seconds of lucidity. I felt the effect almost immediately, a cold wave of artificial indifference trying to smother the inferno of my emotions. The bleeding from my eyes lessened, became a trickle. The pain in my chest, the melting sensation, receded slightly, becoming a dull, distant pressure. With hands now a little steadier, thanks to the chemical anesthesia taking hold, I forced Anna's rigid mouth open. I used my fingers, feeling the inhuman resistance of locked muscles. It was horrible, violating, necessary. I placed another blue pill on her tongue. There was no water. I spat into my hand, a mix of saliva and blood, and shoved my fingers into her mouth again, trying to push the pill down, to trigger her swallow reflex. It was a fight against her body, against the virus, against time. She choked, coughed, but I felt the pill go down. Now it was weight. I fell back onto the cold floor beside the statue of terror that was Anna. The suppressor worked on me, cooling the rage, smothering the love, turning everything into a gray, acceptable void. I stared at the dark ceiling. Blood still dripped from my eyes, but slower. A deep, dull ache persisted in my chest, a reminder of what almost happened. The lights came back on suddenly, a blinding flare that made Anna blink violently. The rigidity began to ease, slowly, like ice melting. A low moan escaped her throat. She was coming back. So was I. But lying there on that dirty floor, feeling the chemical void wrap around me like a protective cocoon, I noticed the dried blood on my face and the persistent, deep pain inside my chest. The pill had saved me from immediate death, yes. But love. Love had touched me. And some things, once melted, don't go back exactly where they were. The price of survival wasn't just the anesthesia. It was knowing that inside me, where there had once been defined organs, there were now warm scars, areas of irreparable fusion. The virus didn't just kill quickly. It left marks. Marks that hurt. Marks that reminded you that any slip, any genuine emotion that escaped the chemical control would be the end. And looking at Anna, who had started to cry silently, relieved and traumatized, I felt a stab of that dangerous ember under the ash. And I smiled. An empty smile, devoid of joy, just a macabre recognition that we were both trapped, not just by the virus, but by what we had to become to not feel. And not feeling, in the end, was just another way of dying, slowly every day. The lights were on, but the darkness inside us was deeper than any blackout. The first time I touched a book from the Sylvan collection, the cover breathed. Not a metaphor, not a trick of the light. A subtle expansion, almost imperceptible, under my fingertip, followed by a faint tremor, like a sleeping sigh. The air smelled of aged leather and something deeper, earthy, faintly sweet, like very old meat stored in a damp attic. The Providence Athenaeum, a neo-Gothic stone monster nestled in downtown Boston, held secrets no tourist brochure mentioned. Pulsating secrets. My name is Andrew. A broke, starry-eyed history student, I took the job cataloging the special collection out of necessity, not courage. Professor Alastair, a man whose skin seemed as ancient and creased as the parchments he guarded, was clear but not honest. Rare works, Andrew, obscure treatises, personal diaries of controversial historical figures. Require extreme care. Touch only with the provided gloves. He didn't mention why the gloves were thick, almost armored fabric, nor why the books, even on the highest shelves, emitted a constant low warmth, like a low-grade fever. The Sylvan collection wasn't made of paper and ink. It was skin. Human skin, treated obscurely, kept not dead, merely dormant. Grotesquely perfect bindings, sometimes bearing faded tattoo remnants, scars turned into raised ridges on the spine, or more rarely, a delicate strand of hair caught in the stitching. The professor called the donors benefactors of knowledge. I learned to call them ghosts with a return address. The rule was simple, lethally simple. To read was to absorb. Every word, every stain on the page, which wasn't paper, but an ultra-thin layer of treated epidermis, was a direct portal into the memories, the traumas, the most intense emotions lived by the original owner of that skin. It was a violent immersion, a psychic violation. You didn't read about the anguish of an Inquisition prisoner. You felt the branding iron on your own flesh, smelled your own burning skin, choked on the suffocating despair of the dark cell. And the longer you read, the deeper you sank, the thinner the line between you and the dead became. The danger wasn't just the madness of living 1,000 alien traumas. It was the tenancy. The professor, with his tired eagle eyes, warned in a tone trying for casual and failing miserably. Don't linger too long on any single volume, Andrew. The human mind is a fragile house. Unwanted guests might decide to stay. What he meant was, read fast, absorb only what's needed for cataloging, and close the book. If you got lost in the memories, if you identified too much, if the dead voice inside your head grew louder than your own, the benefactor's consciousness found a crack. And a crack is all a hungry ghost needs to take up residence. My job was to catalog. Approximate date, subject, possible donors, condition of the living binding. Simple. Until the day I picked up volume SC 777. It was smaller than the others, the skin a paler shade, almost ivory, with a delicate star-shaped scar on the spine. The preliminary record said, Private Diary, 19th century, donated by wealthy Boston family. Seemed harmless. It was a catastrophic error. The thick gloves felt like they burned when I touched the cover. The breathing was more noticeable this time, a rhythmic movement, almost comforting, like a sleeping baby. I opened the book. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. Isadora, May 15, 1887. Today I saw the ocean for the first time. It is vaster than all my dreams. The memory hit me like a tsunami. Not a borrowed recollection, an instant possession. I felt cold, damp sand under bare feet that weren't mine, the raw, salty smell of the ocean, wind playing with long dark hair that obscured my vision. Isadora's astonishment, her pure, overwhelming joy, flooded every cell of my body. It was so intense, so real, I gasped a sigh that echoed hers, a century and a half past. Catalog. Focus. I noted mentally, Isadora's diary, early 1887, personal experiences. I tried to turn the page. But the next entry began. Mother says it isn't proper for a young lady of my standing to feel so much. Curiosity, mixed with the sweet resonance of the previous emotion, was a hook. I read, and plunged into the suffocating repression of the era, the forbidden love for a poor musician, the lies told to meet him in the apple orchard. Every word was a direct injection of feeling. The anxiety of the furtive meeting, the stolen touch of hands, the taste of the first kiss stolen in the shade of the apple trees. They were my lips burning, my heart racing. I lost track of time. The dim light in the special collections room, perpetually twilight, didn't help. The real world, Boston, the 21st century, Andrew, receded, became a faded backdrop. Isadora was vivid, present. Her sorrows were my tears, her small rebellions, my breath. Catalogue. Forgotten. I was living another life, sweeter, more intense, more perilous than my own. That's when I felt the first alien twinge. Not physical pain, but a presence. A whisper at the back of my thought that didn't originate from me. He is beautiful, is he not? It was Isadora's voice, but not a memory. It was commentary, an observation about the memory, as if she stood beside me, reliving it too. The fright was so violent I almost slammed the book shut. Almost. But the next entry spoke of discovering the pregnancy. Isadora's raw terror, her absolute despair, seized me. It was an icy, primal fear that made me hunch in the chair. And the voice whispered again, clearer, closer. What shall we do? Professor Alastair appeared in the doorway then, his face a mask of concern. Andrew, it's 2 in the morning. Are you well? 2 a.m. I'd been there over 5 hours. 5 hours immersed in Isadora. When I looked at him, for a split second, I didn't see the professor. I saw Isadora's stern father, the disapproving gaze that terrified her. I blinked. It was Alastair again, but his look was heavy, far too knowing. You're becoming too attached to this volume, Andrew. It's dangerous. Close it. Now. I tried. My gloved hand trembled over the softly pulsing cover. Part of me wanted to close it, but another part, a part that felt the orchard floor underfoot, that loved the forbidden musician, that feared for the child in her womb, refused to leave. Isadora's voice echoed, no longer a whisper, but clear speech, full of panic, inside my own mind. No. Do not send me back into the dark. Please. The sensation was of double despair. Hers and mine, realizing I was no longer alone inside my skull. Alastair saw the terror in my eyes. He moved fast for a man his age. Andrew, close the book. She's trying to anchor herself. But it was too late. When his bony hand touched the volume, a sharp pain, like an electric shock mixed with a knife stab, exploded in my temple. It didn't come from the book. It came from within. From Isadora fighting to stay. He is mine now. The voice wasn't sweet anymore. It was a possessive snarl, distorted by fear and need. I felt a horrible pressure inside my skull, like another consciousness was expanding, shoving mine into a dark, cramped corner. Pure, animal survival instinct took over. The rules, the care for the books, everything was swept away by one thought: devour. Not read. Devour. I needed to finish the story, absorb all of Isadora at once, saturate my mind to the last memory, so nothing of her remained to cling, to occupy. I ripped off the thick gloves. The skin of the book, bare under my fingers, was warm, damp, alive. It emitted a low moan, almost human, when I touched it. Ignoring Alastair's shout of protest, I tore the page I was on. Not out, but into me. I rolled the strip of inscribed skin and, before the voice in my head could object, shoved it into my mouth. The taste was horrific, salty, metallic, like old blood and sweat. The texture was tender, repulsive. But the effect was immediate. The memory of that page, Isadora telling the musician about the pregnancy, his look of panic, flooded me with brutal, crushing force. Isadora's voice screamed, a mix of pain and surprise. I didn't stop. I tore the next page, and the next. Chewed fast, swallowed with difficulty, gagging on the taste and texture, but forcing it down. Each piece was an intense, painful flashback. The argument with the musician who fled, the father's hatred, the botched abortive tea, the rending pain of labor alone in a derelict shack, the baby's weak cry, the sudden, icy silence that followed. Isadora's most traumatic memories exploded inside me like dirty bombs, each one erasing more of her conscious presence within my mind. She screamed, now just terror and agony, as I consumed her story, her recorded existence. It was a frenzy. Tear, shove in mouth, chew, swallow. Tear, shove, chew, swallow. The room spun. Alistair was pale, backing away, horrified. The cover of the 777, now mutilated, wept a dark, sticky fluid that oozed onto the desk. Its breathing was weak, erratic. The voices in my head were a chorus of screams, mine of revulsion and panic, hers of anguish and dissolution. When I swallowed the last legible fragment, a page describing the baby's final gasp and Isadora's ultimate collapse into absolute despair, a sudden silence fell within my skull. A vacuum. The pressure vanished. The warmth in the book under my fingers disappeared, replaced by a corpse-like chill. The binding was dead. Truly, this time. I fell to my knees on the cold floor, spitting out undigested bits of skin and ink, vomiting bile and horror. The taste of death and alien memory permeated every part of me. Alistair approached cautiously, his face a map of shock and strange understanding. You devoured the narrative. Saved your skin, quite literally. He didn't look happy. He looked terrified. Of me, or that I'd learned the Athenaeum's deepest secret. I left that place that same night. Never went back. Isadora's memories are here. Inside me, deep psychic scars. I feel her fear in the dark, her repressed yearning when I see an orchard, a phantom womb ache when I hear a baby cry. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I think I hear a final sigh echoing, no longer fighting for space, just a shadow trapped in my own synapses. The Sylvan collection remains, its shelves heavy with dreams and nightmares bound in living flesh. And I know a piece of Isadora, the part one couldn't swallow, might be trapped here with me. Forever. And the next time I feel an odd itch on my skin, or hear a voice not my own whispering in the dark, I'll have to wonder. How many pages remain until the book is complete within me, and Andrew is just a footnote in someone else's story? Knowledge has a price. And at the Providence Athenaeum, you pay with your soul, one page at a time.